Welcome back to the HuntFishTravel podcast. I am your hostess, Carrie Z. Hey, if you deer hunt in Wisconsin, 2025 is bringing some of the biggest rule changes we've seen in years. And whether you're chasing your first buck or you are hunting a new county for the first time, the new changes probably will affect you. I sat down with the Wisconsin DNR to break down what's changing, why it matters, and how it could impact your season. So stick around, because I'm pretty sure there's going to be something in it for you, and there probably will be some surprises that you're not going to want to miss. With the new deer hunting regulations, and we are lucky to have Jeff Pritzl, deer specialist, on the line, and he's going to explain some of these changes with the regulations, why they came about, some of the reasoning, answers a lot of the questions. So Jeff, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. Looking forward to it and glad to have the opportunity to share some of this stuff. Because like I said, this is going to be a year of bigger transition than most years for some of the hunters anyhow.
Yeah. So I guess let's start off with what brought about the changes to regulations.
Right, yeah. So everything that we do with deer management in the deer seasons in the state is directed either by administrative code, which is the language and the rules that the Natural Resources Board oversees. And then there are other rules that are based in statute, which the legislature, oversees and the governor signs. So we've got our marching orders coming from both of those entities. And in the administrative code language, it dictates that every 3 years, we review the boundaries of our deer management units. So we do that in concert with the Conservation Congress. And for the last decade, we have had this structure in place that we call the County Deer Advisory Councils. And so each county has an advisory council. Those are led by Conservation Congress delegates. And so we've been doing that for the last 10 years. I guess this would be year 11. And so every 3 years, we do a boundary review that doesn't necessarily result in any changes, but we check in every 3 years. And if we're not going to do any changes, it stays status quo. So we hadn't made any significant changes during the 2020. There was a 2020 review. We did make a few changes in the 2017 review, working with the CDACs, these County Deer Advisory Councils. We did not make any in 2020. The next round of review on schedule is 23. And by then, we had been hearing for multiple years, actually probably most of the last couple of cycles, that in the northern forest part of the state, so back in 2014, we went to county-based units statewide. And we can go into that if you want to, if we have questions about it. But
Sure.
Really, when we went into that system, and that was, again, a public engagement-driven approach. It wasn't the DNR's desire necessarily to go county-based, but it's a project that took us in that direction. And even when we went into that, there was awareness in 2014 that this may be harder to do in the northern forest than it will be to do in the farmland, simply because the northern counties are large and the landscape's different, your densities are different. And so those northern county CDECs had 10 years of experience and came to the conclusion that allocating antlerless deer permits or bonus tags at the county basis was a real challenge, because the eastern side of the, give an example, any county, there's very low deer numbers on one side of the county, and understandably the folks tied to that side of the county don't want to see, many doe tags, if any. The other side of the counties, there's plenty of deer, there's lots of opportunity, and those folks want doe tags. And these county deer advisory councils are really caught in the middle. And so trying to meet one side or the other, it just was, it was a struggle. And finally, in the last boundary review, there was serious momentum, including legislative attention that was generated after the 2020, I want to get my seasons right, a couple of years ago, we had a down deer harvest. And so there was even legislative interest, and there was a lot of momentum to let's go back to some version of habitat-based units, at least in the northern forest. Not necessarily back to what we had in 2014, because one of the reasons we did move away from the units we had back then is it was determined that, frankly, we had too many units and they were too small. And so there was a desire to have fewer larger deer management units. And that's what going to the county system did. But now they wanted to go back to the habitat-based units, but not necessarily back to what we had in 2014. Okay. And so we worked with the Conservation Congress, with the advisory councils, had public engagement last fall, and came up with an approach by where we went back to habitat-based units, but they're larger for the most part than what they were 10 years ago. And so that's really where it came from and why we did it. It was really driven by public desire and feedback we were getting, asking for it. So that's what we're trying to roll forward with this year.
Okay, we're back. Sorry, guys. Technical difficulties. I had some laptop issues. Everything was overheating, and then VPN was yelling at me. So we are back. Hopefully you saw the screen share that I was sharing. Paul Smith of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, a fellow, a Globe board member and longtime member. That beautiful, beautiful image that he created of the DMUs past and present. It's crazy to see how much the Wisconsin structures, the deer management units have changed. It's really insane. I mean, just from between, his image goes back to 1965 all the way to 2024. And now with 2025, I mean, it's pretty interesting.
So. Yeah, and it reflects, there's always been this yin and yang challenge between biological deer management and social deer management, right? And this really reflects trying to balance the interests and ideas of 600,000 deer hunters and human nature, brought into it. And it's always the presumption for people that are familiar with their area, they want to manage it more precisely and more differently, and it would always be, well, whatever the unit size is, the deer are different over here than they are over there. We need to carve our area off so we can manage it more precisely. The irony is, though, that in terms of actually monitoring the deer population the way we do utilizing hunter harvest, you need a certain sample size to work with for statistical accuracy. And so the smaller you make the units, the less accurate the monitoring is because of the smaller sample size. And so getting people comfortable with the idea that bigger is better, isn't an easy discussion, but spend enough time with people talking them through it like we are now and explaining the trade-offs. And that's what it always comes down to. It's the trade-offs of what's more important to you. And so the deer management unit size and the whole notion that, and on top of that, the utilization of antlerless permits has changed culturally from the hunters. And so we've also seen, talking about the difference between 1965 and today, is the cause and effect relationship between putting X number of antlerless tags on the landscape and then having it generate X deer harvest. That's changed also. So that we've had to track that over time in terms of what does it mean to put, X hundreds or X thousands of permits, in a unit.
Yeah.
And there's a strong, hunter perception that more permits equals more dead deer. And if we don't want that, if we're concerned that too many deer are going to get shot, there's a natural reluctance to see more permits being put out there. But the reality is the way things have shifted, that cause and effect relationship with the permits isn't nearly as strong as it used to be. In other words,
really,
you can create opportunity without putting risk of overexploitation out there. But that the human nature of it, the perception of it is still, you put too many tags out there and then we're going to overharvest and then pay for it later.
Yeah.
So that's a narrative that's played out over all those decades. And so talking to hunters about how, we should try to be realistic and objective about what are the trade-offs here. And in today's day and age, when we consider other factors of declining hunter numbers, declining hunter pressure, and change in hunter harvest behavior, that cause and effect relationship between the number of permits and the subsequent harvest is not as strong as it used to be. And the good news part of that is we can create more opportunity. And it does, if things are down, things are off, it doesn't mean we're going to over harvest. It kind of self corrects better than it used to. But that's hard to grapple with or to maybe buy into. And so we understand that. And so that's why we discuss this with our advisory councils every year.
How does one become on the advisory council? Who makes up these councils?
Okay, sure. So the structure of each county's, these councils were created, back in, prior to 2014. And again, it's in administrative code, and it's intended to be a stakeholder group. They are chaired with the chairman, and the alternate chairman are Conservation Congress delegates from that county. So every county has Conservation Congress delegates, and they have a chair in their overall Congress delegation. They select who's going to chair and be the alternate chair of each council. And then there's a seat created to represent different stakeholder groups. So of course there's hunting, there's forestry, there's agriculture, there's tourism, transportation for considerations of road safety with deer collisions, et cetera. So that's another thing that's on a 3-year cycle. Every 3 years, people can apply. They can go on our website, on our CDAC website, and they can submit an application and say, I think I'm a good candidate for this seat. And then we'll receive all the applications. And then we have an ad hoc committee with Conservation Congress who go through the applications, and we try to select the best candidate, for each of those seats. And some of the seats sit vacant because no one that fit that intended stakeholder seat, applied. And some of the advisory councils, currently they have vacancies on their councils. And if the seat's vacant and someone has the credentials, that makes them eligible for that seat, they can apply at any time.
Interesting. That's cool. I wonder if people know that. I bet you a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, it's what's interesting about just even the culture of deer hunting is that, and it's like everything else, right? We've got, like I said, we've got over we got 600,000 deer hunters in this state. Mm-hmm. When we provide public engagement opportunities to participate into the decision-making, policy development, that kind of stuff, if we get 5% engagement, that's a lot, actually. Yeah, and so you've got 90% of your deer hunters that they just like deer hunting, and they're pretty casual about it. And they're like, they just expect that the department and the Congress will figure it out. And they just are like, you tell me when, where, and how, and I'll be there. They don't really engage in the process and aren't even aware that these advisory councils exist, probably. And that brings us to kind of what the timing of why you brought me on too, as it relates to where we're at now with these new deer management units and the antlerless permit, the bonus permit sales, starting next week. There's a whole bunch of hunters this week that are just finding out that, what do you mean the deer management units changed? Because they weren't engaged last fall. And we did the rollout of this process right before the gun deer season last year in hopes that we would catch as many people's attention as possible because they were focused on deer hunting. But, again, it was limited. So we're going to get a bunch of people right now that are learning about it for the first time. And so they've got to quick get up to speed. And then I can guarantee the week before the gun season, there's going to be another 100,000 deer hunters that haven't checked in on this until that week. And it's going to be fresh and new to them. And we'll be doing this again in November, bringing another group up to speed on the changes.
Right. So looking at, and for the people listening to audio, I apologize, because people who are watching this on YouTube will see the 2024 deer management units season structure map versus the 2025, and the different in the color schemes and the different in the numbers for the northern forest zone, which, so let's start in the southern and then work our way up, because I feel like the northern, I'm really not familiar with at all because I don't hunt up there, right? Okay. So I have way more questions about that than I do southern. I mean, I have a lot about southern because I hunt down there. But so, for example, when I look at these maps, last year. Let me ask you, when did the whole metro subunit thing like even come about? And I know it's not super new, but it's relatively new because I don't remember that being a thing when I was 15,
So
or maybe it
depending on where
was and I just never noticed.
Well, so again, we have to go back to the old deer management unit system,
Right.
where we had a numbered system. And I want to say, I'm trying to think. So was it there before when I started? So now we're talking 33 years ago. But the first metro designation was in the greater Milwaukee area. And so that southeast Wisconsin was Unit 77 in those days. And then they created Unit 77M. So here, the old
that's right.
Yeah, the old nomenclature was we had numbered units, and then if the unit got split, it would become an A and a B. Like you'd have Unit 29 would become 29A and 29B. And some of those units got split again, so you had 29C and 29D and that type of thing. And then came the metros, and so you had 77M around Milwaukee, and that slowly started to grow over the years into the surrounding counties, expanded it, and then all the way up the lakeshore in southern Manitowoc County.
I noticed that.
And so then the next metro started growing around Green Bay. And so that was Unit 64M. And so and then we started getting little metros around Madison and La Crosse and Eau Claire. And so that concept was coming in under the old system. And then, but they were separate standalone units. They were, a metropolitan unit unto itself. Now, when we went to the county-based system in 2014, those metro areas, that's when they became these subunits of the county units.
Yeah. They do. They seem to be expanding quite often. And were they created? I mean, why were they created? Like, because there's just so many deer in Milwaukee, because all the deer in everybody's backyards eating our bird seed, because they really are. They really are here in Waukesha, that's for sure.
Yes. When a metro unit got put in place, what it generally was recognizing was there's a lot of deer living in essentially deer sanctuaries that very few people have access to, and it's all private, but some people do have access. And so the concept was basically, we recognize there's a bunch of deer with very limited access to them. Let's give those people that are fortunate and have that access maximum opportunity to harvest deer. And so that's where whether it was more permits or the season structures were different. One of the first things we did with the metros was essentially eliminated the muzzleloader season and just made it 19 days of straight firearm season. And so now we see that carry forward. They get an extended archery season into the end of January automatically, as opposed to an option, that some of the other farmland units have. So it's really because some of these advisory councils, they kind of get into the weeds of, well, how can we manipulate the structure, the permit levels within the metros to maximize harvest. And really what metros do is maximize season length and give those people that do have the access in that area maximum opportunity to harvest deer. And that's pretty much what they do.
Oh yeah. I think it's awesome. I mean, even you live in Milwaukee, I think River Hills is in Milwaukee County. I bet you. I can't
River
remember
Hills,
if it is or
I
not.
think is in Ozaki
County,
just north of the county. No, don't. You're going to tease me. I know. I think you're right. I think it's the most northern township in Milwaukee County.
Because
Mequon and River Hills are next to each other, and then it's Ozaki County north of there.
Because there used to be.
Somebody can say, no, these guys don't know their Wisconsin geography.
Right. Well, look, people, it's been a long time since I worked on 107th and Granville, okay?
Yeah.
But I remember there were like bigger farmsteads out there and horse farms and stuff like that where they had larger 5-10 acre tracts out there where, I mean, if I lived, you wouldn't think that you'd have the opportunity to be able to bow hunt within the city, within Milwaukee County like that. Or even we're out here in Waukesha, you wouldn't think that there's amazing opportunities here in Waukesha County for especially bow hunting. I mean, amazing. Within 5 minutes of my house, I live 5 minutes from downtown Waukesha, and there's 5, 6, 8 minute drive, and there's public land, and there's like big deer. Like I've seen big deer out there,
Well,
where
my in-laws are in Waukesha County, so
so there's really big deer, and there's a ton of them. So
here's an interesting nugget. You're mentioning Waukesha in that transition. I want to say maybe 3 years ago, as far as total harvest in Waukesha County, archery overtook firearms a couple of years ago. So we killed more deer with archery equipment in Waukesha County than firearms, and now that's we're getting really close. And at some point in time here in the near future, that all those greater Milwaukee Southeast counties are going to be taking more deer with archery equipment than firearms.
I believe it. I still don't see very many people, and working remotely, it's really nice that I can go out for a couple of hours in the middle of the day when there's nobody out there. And I mean, it's a ghost town out there, and you're so close to the city. But on the weekends, I still don't see very many people out there, but I am seeing more, like you said, more bow hunters, which is fine. I don't mind that at all. Like people will be like, oh, more hunters or whatever. I don't care. So that doesn't surprise me actually at all. And these are people who are out there and they're really putting in the time and they're putting in the miles. And so that doesn't surprise me. That's very cool, actually.
Yeah. And like I said, if you do the footwork and you do the contacts, even if you're not privileged to own a piece, if you spend the time making some contacts, it could pay off very well in that part of the state. Because there are landowners out there that don't hunt, do recognize there's too many deer on this landscape eating my landscape.
Yeah, lots of farmers eating their seed.
With the concept of hunting, but a little bit of time, a little bit of getting to know them, and demonstrating that you're a responsible person, can open up some doors.
Right. All right. So let's talk about. So say I decide I want to go up to Oneida County and go deer hunting. So I pick up a tag so now I have to pick a number, right? Like, right. It's not like it used to be where I could just, just Northern Forest zone?
Well, you would be picking, just as you do in the farmland, the antlerless tag would be valid
still
for
the county,
and you got to pick private or public. They're land type specific as well. And that's the case across the state, farmland as well. But Oneida County is a very good example of why we went to the units. Matter of fact, there was some folks in Oneida County that really were the big originators of the push that got it rolling.
Oh, really?
Generated the legislative attention and support for this as well. Because Oneida County was one of those examples where, and if for people that knew Oneida County, under the old unit system, most of western Oneida County was in Unit 30, and eastern Oneida County was 31. I might have my numbers right, but anyhow, pretty strong break in terms of deer density. Not as many deer in western Oneida County and plenty of deer in eastern Oneida County, closer to Rhinelander in that area. So that's where the advisory council was really stuck with. We're getting a lot of feedback from folks on the western side of the county that don't want any antlerless tags because they want to see the herd grow. And the folks on the eastern side were like, what are you talking about? We see the antlerless deer all the time, and you're limiting in our opportunity. We actually have chronic wasting disease in eastern Oneida County. We want to harvest more deer. And so now if you go to Oneida County, I think actually there's 3 different units that cover parts of Oneida County. So you have to know which part of the county you're in and which unit, numbered unit you're going to select for. And so that's the challenge. This is going to be a big learning curve this year. It's going to be really challenging for some folks that have to reorient, and we have different versions of maps on our website. And the one, if people have access to and are somewhat comfortable with navigating an interactive map, and especially if you've got OnX or HuntStand or any of those hunting apps on your phone, you're set because they're loaded into those systems. You can zoom into your hunting spot. It'll tell you which unit you're in. Similarly, on the DNR website, we have an interactive map that's intended to help people find public lands. It's called our Public Access Lands site. And you can go into that map and zoom in and out, search around, and then there's layers that you can turn on and off. And when you open that map up, it doesn't automatically show the deer management units, but you can go into the layers tab, turn on the deer management units, then all the boundaries of the units will be there, and then you can search around on that map. You can get right down to, yeah, I know I'm on this town road, or I'm next to this lake or whatever, and see what unit you're in.
Okay, so what if I don't know? I mean, what if I'm like, just get in the car and go and I want to go deer hunting? Do I have to wait 24 hours if I buy a tag?
No, in Wisconsin.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Yep, you just have to purchase your stuff before you go.
Okay, like before I step foot into the
you might have to ask or bring in one of our very knowledgeable conservation wardens on because it used to be I want to say with archery licenses, if you bought the license in season, you had to wait 3 days.
Right. That's why I asked. And I'm like, well, what if I don't know? What if especially now?
Yeah.
Like,
and
I don't know.
Now that's not the case. And I don't even know that you necessarily have to, wait till the next day. I think once you have license in hand, in your electronic account, you're good to go.
There was a comment on your guys' post, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources post that I actually made note of, because he did bring up kind of a good point. And like in my head, I understood the DNR's point. In my head, I also understood his point. So I if you don't mind, I kind of wanted to, and there was a ton of replies too. So if you don't mind, and I don't even know if should I say his name? I don't know. This Brian guy was just like, I have land bordering public access land. When I look to one side, my blind, I'm just a few yards from that land. On the other side is my land. So you have to have a tag for public and a tag for private based on what direction you're facing. Mm-hmm. Because if you're sitting there, you could potentially be watching the public, like if they're coming in from that way, or if they're coming in from your private side. So now you have to have 2 tags, right?
If you want to be covered for both opportunities, you would. And so it's okay. I won't dive in until you're ready to pitch it to me.
Well, no, I guess, like there's a part of me that's like, dude, that sucks. Like, I mean, they're only like $10, so give me a break. But on the other hand, I'm kind of like, they're $10, so that kind of sucks. Like, I live here, and then there's public. What if what if she's walking very slowly, because you're not supposed to running deer, I get it, but she's walking very slowly and she takes that one extra step onto public, and now I'm screwed because I have a private tag.
Right.
Now what?
No, this brings up it's a great question to bring up, because there's a lot of people thinking about that. I would say, so I'll explain it in a minute, but I will say that is the number one complaint I receive directly. Why are you making me choose between public and private land in my unit? So, I hear that all the time. So where that came from, again, back in 2014, when we, working with the project, this was all the spinoff and result of when Dr. James Kroll came to Wisconsin. They did the Kroll report with the deer trustees, and it's commonly known as the Deer Trustee Report, that made a bunch of recommendations to make some changes to address the concerns that had really built up, over the previous number of years, and so we were dealing with the political fallout of all of that, right? So that the implementation of that report was multiple fold, lots of different angles to it. But one of the things that came out of that was when they created these county deer advisory councils, the concept was to shift some of the ownership to the community and away from the agency, so that these county councils, they don't make the final decision, but they make a recommendation, and that recommendation most of the time holds with the Natural Resources Board. And so it was to give those councils control of antlerless harvest opportunity within their boundary, the county. And so one aspect of it was all antlerless tags have to be county specific, because that's how the advisory council has control over adjusting. Then the next thing, and this was another thing that came out of the pre-era in the early 2000s when we were really through regulatory mandate, putting the hammer down on antlerless deer. There was a combination of reality and perception. That's the way it always plays out, was that people did not want to shoot antlerless deer on their own private property. So they would go to the public land to fill their antlerless tags, and thus putting too much hunting pressure, harvest pressure on the public land and ruining it for those that only had access to the public land. So they were like, we're going to protect the public land from over harvest pressure by limiting antlerless permits on the public land you're not forcing the issue, but you're creating a situation where the private landowners should get an antlerless tag for their land.
That's
leave the public land for the public land hunter. Of course, there's many of us, myself included, that hunt on both. And so, it's like, geez, now why do I have to have both? So it's a number one complaint we get. Yeah. It's not something the department wanted or pushed. It's something that we did in response to what the public engagement generated at that time. So in some future day, under a future rulemaking process and public engagement, if this rises up as an issue to where the majority of the public come back to us in the Conservation Congress and say, we're tired of the whole public-private land thing, it could go away. But as it stands right now, that's what the administrative code says, and that's the way it is set up, and it will stay that way until the administrative code language changes. So the other thing now, we can look 10 years later, we can say, all right, well, the purpose of the private-public land differentiation was to improve hunting on public land, right? And we would measure that by seeing the idea was we'll get increased buck harvest on public land because there'll be more deer and the hunters will do better. Well, we're 10 years into it and that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
So there's no evidence that the intention of the public-private land differentiation is generating the intended outcome. So the question then becomes, is this something that the public really wants to continue under the premise that we want to limit access on public land? Or is this an added hassle to hunters that's unnecessary because it's not actually generating the intended outcome? And we actually do have evidence in some parts of the state where lack of access to antlerless permits actually drives down overall hunting effort on public land.
Oh, totally.
They just decide to go elsewhere. And so what that has is a negative drag on the buck harvest then. So you see the buck harvest going down, that gets interpreted as, well, the deer population must be going down, when in reality, it's capturing hunter effort.
Just less kills, right? So that is interesting. Boy, anybody who listens to that, who walks away saying, oh, well, the DNR still sucks, is an idiot, because literally, you have to put the line somewhere. It just kind of sucks for some folks that's where they ended up being. I guess I didn't really think about that. Really makes sense. That kind of actually hit home, because I've had people who literally, well, I practice QDMA on my property, but on public, if it's brown, it's down, literally. So, and I guess I didn't really make that correlation. I don't know.
That's probably happening in some situations, and that would be very frustrating, of course, to some. But the question is it happening at the scale that it merits, this rule change? And again, now 10 years later, we're into it and we've got nothing really to show for it. Yeah. So do we continue doing this? Yeah. Because it sounds good.
Right. Yeah. So how long do you guys, how long does like a study or like these practices, how long do you go until you finally say, here are the numbers, here's the data, here are the pie charts, it's either working or it's not working? And does that really, it's not what I'm hearing, and maybe I'm incorrect, but it really isn't up to the DNR. It's really up to the, these councils really, and people who get involved. And I feel like if there are people who have the qualifications who are really like, this isn't working, let me get involved and help course correct here, then they really should.
Yeah. What's what's interesting, what's unique about deer in Wisconsin, and you'd think because deer being such a high profile species, we have what would be referred to as strategic management plans for our game species. We're working actually right in the news right now. It's time to update the turkey management plan. We've updated the bear plan a couple of years ago. They're looking at updating a beaver plan right now. There's an elk plan. Most of our species have, and those plans usually have like a 10-year lifespan, right? So they run for 10 years, and then it's all right, we're going to update it and check in. We've never had a strategic plan for deer that's specifically labeled that way. Deer have always been, and it's part of it is just the nature of their high profile. Deer management always plays out in the political arena through unrest, unfortunately. So we've been on almost a 10-year schedule, in as much as, so some of folks, and this was earlier in my career, we had a big project at the turn of the century called Deer 2000 and Beyond. And that was spurred by a recognition that through the 1990s, everyone was capturing, and we were seeing this burgeoning deer herd in the 1990s. We were already then starting to struggle with how do we get enough deer harvested to stay at our population objectives. We're losing the reins in these more productive parts of the state. The Ernebucks were coming, the T-zones were coming, trying to get, so Deer 2000 and Beyond was a huge project with the department, the Conservation Congress, big public engagement effort. And so that we had action committees and we had reports, and then a bunch of rule changes were implemented coming out of that Deer 2000 and Beyond project. So that ran for about 10 years until, about 10 years later, the wheels kind of fell off on that. And there was a strong desire to take a fresh look at everything. That was the Deer Trustee Report project. So they brought in outside experts, and they put together their analysis and issued the Crow Report, or the Deer Trustee Report. So now that was the genesis of the deer system we've had for about the past 10 years. So now we're at that 10-year plus mark where it's starting to feel like, all right, it's time to put everything on the table again and revisit this, which is what we did in the portion of it with this deer management unit review and boundary change that we were just talking about earlier. So when we looked at all of the things that probably need some attention and revisiting with public engagement, the strategy was, there's some really clear stuff here, call it low-hanging fruit or whatever you want. It was the demand to go back to a habitat-based system in the north was strong enough and clear enough that it was like, all right, we're going to do that. So we did that project. That's done. And now we're going through that transition of, all right, implementing. Everyone's going to have to learn it. Just like 10 years ago, we had to learn the whole new system that started in 2014.
Yeah.
And so now the next question going forward is, all right, what's next? And is there public desire to start another process that's going to result in rule changes? And
right.
That means
going
to the Natural Resources Board, and sometimes these rule changes happen through the annual spring hearing process. We have this institution in Wisconsin where the public can recommend changes to the rules through our annual spring hearing. That's evolved over time too. Conservation Congress has a lot of involvement in that, and we work with them. Deer rule changes don't tend to happen through that spring hearing process as much because they're big statewide things often, and we tend to have just a separate project. Like we're gonna do a deer rule package. So yeah, the question now is what's next, and that won't come from us internally. It will come from the public, asking for it. There needs to be a demand demonstrated, and that's where the Conservation Congress and these deer advisory councils do really come into play then, because they're in a position to capture that desire, come to us and say, all right, we'd like to put this on the table for further analysis.
I think it's interesting, and I don't think people realize how much I think, and I feel like people like my dad, who's gone now, but he used to always just sit around. He used to say, well, it's just a DNR. They're just a bunch of guys sitting in a room coming up with these rules. And I don't think that people really understand how much actually goes into these regulations and how much paperwork and administrative work really goes into these things. It's not just a bunch of people just sitting around and being like, we'll just change the boundaries to over here or whatever, just because, it is so much work and it's so much to manage. And I don't know how you guys and everybody does it. It's just mind boggling to me. It's crazy.
First of all, it takes patience, right? And so these systems aren't unique to hunting and fishing. I mean, it's the same process for everything that the state agencies deal with. And it was intentionally built to be somewhat burdensome and laborious so that it wasn't easy. Otherwise, you'd have changes happening every year. And,
Can you imagine?
So typically a good idea that people can get behind and say, we want to see this change is a 3-year process.
Yeah. So with a lot of people saying, I guess, oh, well, when I was younger, the deer herds used to be this number or whatever. Is there like a target herd number that we have in Wisconsin? Like, is there, I mean, obviously you can't go around and be like, well, we have, 3,408 deer in this county. But is there like a target number or something that Wisconsin tries to keep as far as herd numbers?
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
That's a great question because I'm going to keep making these comparisons to pre-2014 and what we've been doing for the last 10 years. So up until from 1962 until 2014, those deer management units we were talking about had a population goal. Each unit had a herd density goal, which was expressed as the target for this unit is 15 deer per square mile, and it would range from 10 in some of the really lower, poor productive, northern units up to 30 or 35 deer per square mile in the really productive areas. And so if you were to say, if your question was, what's the statewide target? Well, you'd have to take all the unit targets, add them up. Right. Here's our target for the entire state. And again, back in the 1990s, it became pretty apparent that we were losing the ability to manage to those goals, especially in the farmland units.
Okay.
And there was always fighting about, first of all, we can make a population estimate. And we would make those estimates based on the information the hunters gave us. It was based on the harvest. So hunters provided the data, it generated a population estimate. And then we'd say, all right, based on what you folks shot this fall, this is, in the way the system worked in its simplest terms was the fall harvest would be used to calculate how many deer must have been alive before the hunting season started to have allowed this kill to happen. And we had years and years and years of data that would say, we know you're killing 50%, we tend to kill 50% of the herd. I'm just using it as a round number. So if you killed 1,000 deer in that unit that year, that meant there must have been 2,000 deer alive in September before the season started. And so we would use that and we'd generate a pop. And then you would subtract the deer that got killed during the hunting season and say, all right, now there's 30 deer per square mile in the unit and that's our goal. Or that's how many are there, but our goal for that is 20. And so we need to increase the harvest to get down to 20. But you'd have a lot of people that would say they just wouldn't believe that the estimate was accurate. And that's still the case, and it will always be the case because simply deer are not evenly distributed on the landscape. So I can take you to Wapaka County, highest deer densities in the state, in the country, highest kill densities in the state. There's a few other counties, rivaling them, but in that area. And I can find hunters that have had very poor deer seasons. That's just the nature of deer hunting, right? There's always going to be some that are, unfortunately, they have access to marginal land. It's not going to produce what we're saying.
Yeah.
So there was always this skepticism that the DNR deer population estimates are way out of whack. They're way too high. And so to address that, another thing we changed 10 years ago was we went away from those target goals for each unit and made it much more subjective and qualitative. And now each unit simply has an objective, not a goal. And that objective is to either allow the herd to increase, cause the herd to decrease, or keep the herd where it is. Very simple. And so
Interesting.
now we're just asking hunters through those advisory councils, hey, based on where you think the deer herd is and where you think it should be, should the goal be to increase it, decrease it, or try to hold it where it is? And then the advisory council makes a recommendation on antlerless tags to try to meet that objective. It's
Okay,
it doesn't, how well it works is subjective too, but
of course,
that's the basis of the system.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you take, and just because I'm fascinated with this, because I'm a total metrics nerd, so I apologize.
Cool.
So, and I'm just going to take Waukesha County because I know there's a lot of deer here, right? And obviously, like a county like Door County is, well, I don't know, maybe Door County does have a lot of deer, but I would think that it wouldn't because it's smaller. But anyway, the point is, so if you take something like Waukesha County, which has 550 square land miles, not water miles, times say 30 deer or whatever, you come up with 16,500 deer, and only 2,800 deer were taken last year. That actually kind of makes sense because there's a crap ton of deer in Waukesha County, but that's a lot of deer taken in Waukesha County. I mean, 3,000 deer to me is a lot. People might argue with me, but compared to like Sauk County, which has twice as many deer taken, but for Waukesha County, I think that's a lot of deer. But so the numbers actually really make sense. So I guess that's so interesting to me. So with that estimate, because obviously, like you said, we're not counting duck, head, Bambi and everybody else. You could roughly estimate that there's about 16,000 deer around here. I don't know, that the numbers really, really make sense in my head for whatever reason. So then I know that in years past there were northern counties though that had much, much, much smaller herds estimates. So, and those counties would have like 0 antlerless tags available. So, but now those counties do have antlerless tags available. So why would we, and is it just because we've had like some milder winters, do you think? So why would like changing these borders and everything and opening it up, how would that increase the herd numbers up there if the goal is to boost up the herd numbers up in northern Wisconsin?
Yeah. So
does that even make sense? I was totally rambling. I don't even know if that made sense.
I know exactly what you're getting at. And so going back to the Oneida County example that you brought up before. So as I was talking with the folks that really were interested in this, division back to habitat-based units, we wanted the same thing, and we wanted it for opposite reasons, because their interest was the western side of Oneida County, low deer densities. We don't want antlerless permits there. And I could tell them till I'm blue in the face that you could put the antlerless permits there, and they're not going to, if the deer aren't there, they're not going to fill the tags, and they're not going to have that much of an impact. But yet they still feel strongly that not making the tags available is our quickest path to recovering the deer herd, which is what would happen. So you referenced those years where there was 0 tags available. Yeah, that always comes after severe winters. And it's simply a matter of trying to allow the herd to recover back to its average or normal state as quickly as possible. And that may or may not happen depending on weather in subsequent years. So now we've been having a few mild winters in a row. The herd can grow, creates opportunity. But I wanted the split in Oneida County because I was more concerned about the eastern side of Oneida County, where there was plenty of deer, and the hunters there were being cut out of opportunity to harvest a deer for really no reason, because what they did or didn't do on the eastern side of the county wasn't going to have any impact on the western side of the county. And so it would be like, all right, now that we have a line that says if you want to play it conservative in the western side of the county, and that's what the public input is telling us, well, go ahead, we can do that without it being at the expense of the hunters on the east side, which if they have to play along with the rules from the folks on the west side until things get better on the west side, they're just missing out on opportunity. And it may never get better on the west side, even with, because it's a different landscape. So now we can customize the opportunity better to the sustainability of of the deer population in the harvest. And the whole system, when this system was built back in the 1960s, it was under the premise that hunters were mobile. And so that when things went bad in an area, which they inevitably will in the north at some point in time, and we're better in another area, we could telegraph to the hunters, hey, here's where harvest opportunity is. We're going to put more tags over in this unit. We're not going to put them in this unit. And the intention was then the hunters would move to the other unit. And hunters back then were more mobile. Yeah. And the reality in today's hunting culture is hunters are very sedentary. They're very locked in to their spots, and they're not going to follow tag availability like they used to. So again, the system doesn't work like it used to decades ago.
Yeah, you're right about that. That's a good point, because now I bought a tag for public in this county, in this zone, and that's where I'm going to be. That's interesting.
Yeah, and there can still be a little bit of this, but in some counties with a lot of whether a lot or a little public land, there was concern that, well, if we make opportunity available on our public land, but the neighboring county doesn't, everyone's going to come over to our county and overhunt the public land. And again, 20 years ago, that was probably a legitimate issue.
Yeah.
Today, it's not that it wouldn't happen, but it just doesn't happen like it used to. I mean, and again, hunters adjust based on their experience, and they not necessarily in changing locations, but whether they're going to hunt or not, the hours of effort they're going to put into it.
It's a different world. It's a different world from 10 years ago to 20 years ago to 30 years ago to 40 years ago. Everything's
that's the case
changed
with everything.
Yeah.
And so we should not expect it to not be the case for deer.
Right.
That's where
100%.
And again, I don't shoot down the attitudes of people like, well, back in the 1990s, it was this, or the 1980s, it was this, or grandpa was this.
Because they're right.
I'm not arguing with you at all. And yes, I totally understand why you would wish it to go back there or be like that again. I'm just here to honestly tell you this is what would have to happen for that to happen. And the reality is it's probably not going to happen. But that's the nature of most things in life.
Agreed. What do you think? Are there any other questions? Those were the big ones that I had that I guess stood out in my head too when I looked at it, or that I saw people asking that I was like, yeah, that's a good question. Are there any questions that we didn't cover, maybe that has stood out or that people have asked that you think would be pertinent for people to know? Other than the fact that that if you go on right now, you can't buy doe tags, but you will be able to August 18th. Never fear.
Right. This is the year that it's Monday the 18th that the bonus tags go on sale. So there's the farmland.
That's true. We should clarify.
They've been available ever since the board meeting set the permit levels back in June. And so those have been available for a while now, but it's the bonus tags for sale that go on sale on the 18th. And you brought up the probably the best, most common questions. The one you mentioned about the guy that hunts close to a line.
Yeah.
In that example, you were talking private versus public, but I also am hearing about people that now are finding themselves in a tough spot because they do hunt in multiple places. And if in the past they were all in one county, their tag covered them for the county, and now the county is divided into several units, and they're like, oh, now I have to get this one or this one. But that's no different than the individual that under the prior units hunted close to the county line, and they maybe hunted close to a spot where 3 counties came together. George Meade Wildlife Area is a great example, a big, great public hunting ground right smack dab in the middle of Wisconsin. And I used to live near there. I hunted Meade. The Meade Wildlife Area is partly in Marathon, partly in Portage, partly in Wood County. So if you hunted on all parts of that property, you'd need 3 different antlerless tags. Well,
oh my God.
Now those folks are back into situations where it's like, all right, one tag covers that area. It just shifted, who's in and who's out as far as, dang it, now I'm close to a line and I need 2 tags. But for everyone that it made it more complicated, for somebody else, it made it simpler because, oh, good, now my hunting spots are all in the same unit again.
Right. Well, awesome, Jeff. Well, if people want to go and find all these maps, I'm going to obviously link to all this stuff in the show notes at HuntFishTravel.com. And I will share this out everywhere that I can think of because I feel like this is really important information. I think it's going to clear up a lot of confusion. But if people want to find up, I know I did see one of, not complaint, but people were like, oh, and I mean, admittedly, sometimes I have to squint and look at the map and I'm like, I have no idea where the lines exactly are. Where is this? What is going on? But I think these are just the preliminary maps, right? Like,
Well,
go ahead.
yeah, this is the first year we're getting some feedback on if, and we did it pretty much the same way we did it back in 2013 and 12 with the old unit lines, where now you're just showing the highway line, the highway number.
Right.
We do our best when it changes roads, you change the road name, but you're trying to balance having the map not be too busy and confusing with having everything you need. And yeah, some people are like, I can't tell which road that is on this map. So we're getting some good feedback where when we reissue the map next year, it will be hopefully better from a user friendliness standpoint. But again, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you have access to our website, if you have access to the interactive map, you can zoom right in, right down to the town roads and everywhere and see what unit you're in. And I think this is great what you're doing so that hopefully folks over the weekend can do their homework, get comfortable with it. And it's not everywhere in the state, but in the northern part of the state and to a certain degree in some of the central forest, people recognize that the permits sell out quickly. So they are under the gun, at 10 a.m. on Monday morning, they want to be in line. And if they get it, they want to get to the counter and be able to say, I need a doe tag for unit 112. Not get to the counter and go, holy cow, I don't know what unit I'm in. And then everyone else behind them is going, come on already. The tags are getting sold. So there's going to be some anxiety and some tensions and stress, I'm sure, in some places on Monday. But so to the degree that what you getting the word out, and we're trying in other venues, trying to make it as user-friendly as possible, but it's going to be a bit of a growing pain challenge, this year for sure. Next, we won't be doing this annually. So once they know their unit, this won't be nearly as big of an obstacle next year.
Totally. We'll be okay. Everybody will be okay. I promise. We'll get through it. There's apps out there. You guys have an app. Is it the Go Wild app or something? I apologize. We don't use it because we have Onyx.
We don't have the app, and not to plug the private entities that are out there, but people are telling me, and it's so commonly used now. Again,
Onyx
the horde of hunters that have smartphones, which is the majority. It's not everybody. So we can't forget about the folks that don't have computer access. They're the ones that are going to be in the toughest spot. What I would say is those folks that don't, many of them, they have friends, family, neighbor, they have somebody that does help. Think ahead about grandpa or whoever that's like, they're going to need some assistance figuring out and reach out to them and help them through that.
Yep. Go to your guys' interactive atlas. Like you said, you can print it out. You guys, it's really easy to print. I do it because a lot of places, even if you have something like Onyx or any of these hunt stands or whatever, it doesn't matter because if you don't have signal, guess what? They don't always work. And I know they're supposed to be satellite driven, but I've been in places where they don't work. So, and I've been really glad to have my PDF printed out. Trust me. I know people make fun of me. I don't care because I'm the one figuring out where I'm going. Okay. So, but my dad, someone like my dad, who would never in a million years have an app on his phone, was always, he had his binder full of PDF printouts. But, honestly, but like you said, like somebody like him, he's exactly the perfect guy to go on the, you guys have that interactive atlas and is wonderful. So I'll be sure to link to that in the show notes as well. You can go right to the show notes in this episode and be able to get right to the links, all the maps. If you want to look at the old maps, I'll link to them too. And to that article that Paul Smith had written, because it was really interesting looking at the 1965 DMUs and stuff.
And if when you do that, the one thing with that interactive map is people have to, the biggest challenge will be the deer management unit layer is not on by default. You have to go in the map and then turn that on.
Sure. I'll put a blurb in there. I will. That's a good point. Awesome.
And it's one of those things. It takes multiple clicks to get there, and you got to find the spot in the drop down. You got to go to layers, and you got to go to recreational opportunities, and then you got to go to deer management units, and then turn it on.
Yeah. But it'll be worth it once you figure it out.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Jeff, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your evening to come on and explain and answering my questions. And hopefully we've shed some light for some of the folks listening and watching at home. So.
Yeah. No, thank you for the service you're providing and giving us another outlet to do this, to try to help make it as smooth as possible for folks this fall.
For sure. Appreciate all that you guys do at the DNR, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Okay. Thanks, Gary. And if not before, have a great hunting season.
Yeah, you too.
Okay.